Here we go. Testing. Two times now. Okay. So are we ready? Is it 6 o'clock? You know, I like to be on time. I am. Good evening. First of all, thank you very much for being here tonight. And for those persons who are watching by YouTube, as you are aware, this is one of three community budget meetings or hearings, conferences we will have prior to the board approving or prior to a budget being submitted to the board sometimes in March and April, and the board finalizing or approving that in June. This is an attempt to make the public aware of what we intend to propose for the next school year. Obviously, the purpose of these meetings is to get feedback from the community about what you're hearing, what you're seeing. This comes in the context, obviously, of the board's effort around a citywide plan, comes under the context of ESSER dollars coming from the federal government, obviously dollars that are coming to the state as well through the settlement with the Rams, and also the federal dollars that will be coming to the state of Missouri relative to the Biden initiative going forward around infrastructure. So I think you take all of that in consideration as you think about the district's budget and the direction that we're looking to go in. And so without further ado, I'll turn you over to Mrs. Angie Banks, who is our CFO, who will walk you through our presentation, and then we will remain both for any kind of questions that might come through chat or for the persons who are here tonight. Without further ado, Mrs. Banks.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Well, hello and welcome. Again, my name is Angie Banks. I am the Chief Financial Officer for the St. Louis Public Schools District. And this is our 2021-22 budget Forum series. So tonight is the first night. Our second night will be December 9th at 6 o'clock, and our third forum will be on Saturday, December 18th at 9 a.m. You'll be able to find a copy of this presentation along with our current budget, fiscal year 2022, on our website. I'll spend about 15 or 20 minutes on this presentation, and then Dr. Adams and I will be available for questions afterwards. So our agenda for tonight will cover at a high level our strategic initiatives, which really drive the budget development process, community participation that we've had over the last couple of years and look forward to receiving this year, the current year upgrade and ESSER II plans, and then we'll go into the preliminary fiscal year 2023 budget, both revenues and expenditures. And we'll compare that to the current year and also the prior year. Finally, we'll enlist your recommendations and suggestions for next year's budget. So, our strategic initiatives. Transformation Plan 3.0 is the district's strategic plan. All initiatives must align with one of the 5 pillars, if not more, of Transformation Plan 3.0 to support excellent schools, advance equity and fairness, cultivate cultural responsiveness, focus on student reading as our core, and also collaborating with our partners to ensure our students receive the support that they need. Our budget development process. These are the steps of the process every year, and they must align with our strategic plan, as I just stated. Budget development starts with planning, which right now is part of the planning process. And we go through several other phases of budget development: preparation, adoption, implementation, and evaluation. And you can see the general timeframes for those phases on the lower right-hand side of the graphic. Budget development is an iterative process where we make adjustments and improvements every year and along the way based on events that might influence the process, such as a pandemic, consolidation, community feedback, etc. So community participation. Over the past few years, we have heavily marketed on our website, through social media outlets, newsletters, principal messages in the American, and through other means. We've offered 3 budget forums every year for the last couple years, and there'll be 3 this year as well, and responded to questions. We've also posted videos on the website, presentations, and we've had several consolidation meetings and ESSER surveys to get your feedback, along with our other feedback opportunities like Let's Talk. And now we have a new feedback line, We Hear You. So again, we certainly welcome your feedback and suggestions, just as we have in prior years. So let's get right into the numbers, starting with the current year, fiscal year 2022, revenue budget. We have 5 fund categories for our revenue budget, and they're grouped into similar fund types. You'll see the 5 different groupings of our revenue funds on the right side of the graphic. The general operating budget is the largest fund category, representing 68% of the revenue budget, and it includes property taxes and sales taxes, our state basic formula and transportation revenue, Medicaid, and several other smaller sources of revenue. Our state and federal grants make up 19% of the revenue budget, and they include all of our entitlement grants from Title I through Title IV, special education, early childhood special education, adult education, Perkins, and our newest ESSER funds, Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Funds, and there are a few others. Our debt service revenue category includes about 7% of the revenue budget, and it's made up primarily of property taxes. Food service at about 4% of the revenue budget, mostly is reimbursements from the federal and state government for our food service expenditures. Local grants kind of round things out at about 2% of the revenue budget and includes the St. Louis Public Schools Foundation and Parsons Blewett provided funds, private donors and contributions, and other local grants. So of course, we consider all of our revenue sources important, and they play a role in our student success. On to the fiscal year 22 expenditures. We have these grouped into 6 object categories, as you can see on the right-hand side of the graphic. Salaries are the big blue slice of the pie and make up 42% of the expenditure budget. So in addition to regular wages, salaries include costs for substitutes, temporary staff, extra service, overtime, and summer school pay. As you might expect, our second largest slice is benefits in orange, representing 20% of the expenditure budget. It includes district paid pension, Social Security and Medicare, and our health benefits. So when you consider our payroll expenditures, both salaries and benefits, they represent 62% of the expenditure budget. Now, you might hear from other districts that their payroll expenditures are higher than 62%. And part of the reason is because we have quite a few purchased services. That's another slice at 19% of the expenditure budget. That includes all of our purchased professional services, property services, transportation services, communication services, insurance, dues, and memberships. So since we have outsourced our transportation, that's a large expense that might be included in another district's payroll expenditures. Supplies and materials at 9% include everything from general and operational supplies, standardized tests, trophies, incentives, uniforms, textbooks, and instructional materials, furniture, and computers and laptops under $1,000 per unit. But you might be surprised to know that electric and natural gas utilities are also included in supplies and materials. Capital outlay represents 4% of the expenditure budget and includes depreciable and individual items costing more than $1,000. So included in this category are land and building improvements, equipment, furniture, computers, and computer software over $5,000. Long and short-term debt at 6% of the expenditure budget includes principal and interest payments on our outstanding bonds, which are about a little over $200 million. So on to our fiscal year 2022 upgrade plans. This is really just a reminder that many of our upgrade plans were a result of the consolidation and also from community feedback. And most of these upgrade items, which I'm not going to read to you, but most are funded by our general operating budget. However, some exclusions to that would be salaries that are funded outside of GOB, including our reading teachers, family community specialists, and then also ESSER 2 is a separate fund of its own, a federal fund, which obviously is not GOB funded. Many of our upgrade plans are well underway. And of course, as you might suspect, excluding some of the salaries, as we've had some vacancies that many school districts, not just in the state of Missouri, but across the country, have been filling. Once the ESSER 3 or the American Rescue Plan funds were announced, we increased our ESSER 2 allocation from $20 million to $46 million. You can see in the green text behind each item what the plan was originally for the upgrade plans and perhaps some changes that were made. Other additions that may not be on here include an increase to the extra service rate from $25.52 an hour to $40 an hour. There's been an increase in our overtime rate from time and a half to double time for all hours in excess of 40 hours a week. Our long-term substitute rate was increased as well. And those are some of the more significant ones. This slide demonstrates the significant investment that the federal government has made into public K-12 education in response to the pandemic, over $200 billion. St. Louis Public Schools will be the recipient of over $160 million over the next several years. To date, we have already spent the $10.7 million of ESSER 1 funds, and we've rolled out the budgets for the ESSER 2 funds earlier this month. We anticipate that we'll receive reimbursement from E-Rate of about at least $2.5 million for monthly internet service. And obviously, with the large dollars that are forthcoming for ESSER 3 or ARP, we've got a lot of planning to do for the next 2 years. So although I'm sure you all have probably already heard a lot about the ESSER funds, just to remind you of the goals, basically is to ensure the safe reopening and that students can remain in schools and be safe, both students and staff. The funds are also to address the unfinished learning, both pre and post-pandemic, and to build sustainable and equitable teaching and learning systems. So that's where the funding will go. I know Dr. Adams has presented many times on the ESSER funding, so you've probably seen this, but this is how the district has allocated the $46 million of ESSER 2 funds. 4% or $1.8 million is for indirect or administrative costs. Now, this is compared to the 23% that is allowable to be claimed as indirect expenses. We wanted as much as possible to go directly into the classrooms. Therefore, we've budgeted 55% or $24.4 million directly to schools and 10% or $4.4 million to the academic office. 25% or $11 million was budgeted in operations and facilities, and 5% or $2.2 million budgeted each to student support and technology. Part of the ESSER plan is to ensure that historically underserved populations receive additional resources. The district identified 5 student categories and funding to increase towards those areas. Now, since all students were impacted by the pandemic, all students will receive a minimum of $875 of ESSER 2 funding, as you can see on this slide. Now, for example, if that same student receiving $875 is also eligible for free and reduced lunch, which is an income indicator that is different than CEP or community eligibility provision, She will also receive an additional $263 in ESSER funding. Again, if that very same student has an IEP, an individual education plan, she'll receive an additional $438 in ESSER 2 funding. And the same applies for that student if she's homeless or an English language learner, ELL. So an individual student could receive as much of $2,452 in ESSER 2 funding if they fall into all 5 of those categories. Now, if a student does not fall into the bottom 4 categories, they're still receiving the $875 of ESSER funding. Now, when I say that the student receives it, this is based on the school's population. So this is actually the school's budget. So the actual student doesn't receive these funds, but the school receives it on behalf of those students. And each school has plans to ensure that their student body receives the resources that are most appropriate for them. The schools have also included their building steward and PTO president in the ESSER planning. So I'm sure some of you are wondering, well, we know what the ESSER 2 per student funding is. What about the other funds? So for the general operating budget, or GOB, all schools receive an allocation of $172.50 per student. And this is for discretionary purposes only, so it doesn't include their staffing. These are their spendable dollars. And for Title I, each school would receive between $580 to $830 per eligible student. And that's really dependent on family income. Okay, so that leads us up to fiscal year 2023 budget. And I know that this is a lot of information on this slide. So what we have here is the total fiscal 2023 budget. Also, we have the fiscal year 22 budget, which is the current year, and it's the approved 2022 budget with some additions. And we also have the fiscal year 2021 budget, or not the budget, but the actuals or the projected actuals from last year, just so that you can get a comparison as to how things are progressing from year to year. You can really tell from the far right column what's going on from one year or from 22 to 23. For example, the top half are revenues. We've got local, county, state, and federal revenues. Our total revenues for fiscal year 2023 is about $487 million. The far right column represents the dollar change from the fiscal 2022 budget. So you can see that the major change for the 23 budget is based on federal revenues. That's the $50 million in ESSER 3 funds that we anticipate for next year. Our total ESSER 3 allocation is about $100 million. So we anticipate that we'll spend $50 million in 2023 and $50 million in 2024. So as far as expenditures are concerned, we have included the negotiated rates for fiscal year 2023 in the salaries. And we really split the ESSER 3 funds amongst purchase services, supplies and materials, and capital outlay. And you can see that in the far right column as to how those values have changed. There are a few other changes in the revenues. You'll note that the local revenues have gone up somewhat for 2023. We anticipate some additional property tax revenue. a little bit in county revenue as well. And in our state revenue, we anticipate that we will lose some basic formula funding. So that's kind of how we look at a 3-year view of the budget. What are the things that are changing from year to year? What things are actually working well? We certainly evaluate that. Make sure that those things are repeated in the next year. What might not be working so well? We'll take a look at that and make some changes. So our fiscal year 2023 budget plans. As I've mentioned, we've included the salary, and there's some minimum wage increases that are already built into the budget. But of course, it's all preliminary because we have not built out the detailed budget. We'll be evaluating our current spend this year to see what's working and what's not. There'll certainly be a continuation of some of the services from this year into next year. We know that those ESSER 3 funds, that's an additional $50 million that we have to look forward to. We have a new transportation, potentially contractor. We have a lot of facility contracts that we're looking to implement next year. And this is really where we want your feedback. What do you think we need to do? What is it that you're hearing from your peers and from your community? We want to know. So that really concludes the presentation for this evening. I want to thank you for your attention. The lines are now open. You can ask your questions, put it in the live chat. Certainly put any feedback that you might have also in our new feedback line. We hear you. Thank you. Yes. So are you talking about in our current fiscal year that there's an increase for SAVIS, which is our new literacy adoption? Yeah. Well, I know that, and Dr. Adams might want to help me out on this, but reading certainly is a core for our district. So we went out to obtain a new literacy program, and SAVIS was selected, which includes a lot of professional development for teachers and staff. Of course, all that testing that you're talking about, some of that is part of the process to make sure that students are increasing as we expect. So that is part of the process. Dr. Adams.
So to answer your question from a budget perspective, SAVIS was purchased with last year's budget amount, not this year. It is a new reading curriculum that is being implemented in every single school. Some of it is testing. We have minimized the amount of testing that's necessary. STAR reading assessments are what we use mainly to determine where students are grades 3 through 8. So this year's budget does not include new purchases for SAVIS. Last year's budget did. And so that's why you see a lot of changes in terms of reading around the SAVIS curriculum. So it is not impacting this year's budget. The approximately $2.2 million spent last year is for the new reading curriculum that is in place that's being implemented. So on a scale of 1 to 10, it's about a 4 or 5 in terms of implementation. It will take the whole year before teachers get up to speed in terms of understanding what needs to be done with the entire curriculum. So at this point in time, yes, you indicated the transportation budget is anywhere from 24 to $30 million. The core budget is about 24, 25 million. And then we have to have buses to come back for sports and other kind of programs. We are required to provide transportation as a result of the desegregation agreement with magnet schools. We are required to provide transportation to them. So you are correct. There are buses, it seems, everywhere. And our transportation contract is a very healthy, meeting costly contract. What you might also see happening across the city is that our current vendor is also a vendor for 2 or 3 other charter schools. So the buses you see may be SLPS buses, but they may be also charter school buses. We are required to provide transportation to students. And right now we have approximately 16 to 17,000 students who are eligible for transportation as a result of out of our 20,000 students as a result of the desegregation agreement. So you are correct. It is a costly amount. It is part of the history of the district that we provide transportation to all families across the district that live outside of 1 mile of a school. And so you will see that happening. Moving forward with the new vendor, we hope to try to minimize some of that. We will still have that same requirement, but it's going to be hopefully a better job around consolidation and determining where routes go as we move forward with the new vendor.
Again, we thank you for your attention. We welcome you to continue to put your recommendations and suggestions in the chat and also on our new feedback line. We hear you. Thank you and good night.